The cargo ship Soul Wanderer moved slowly through the dark space between stars. It was a big ship, but not a pretty one. The metal hull was covered with scratches and dents from many years of work. Solar panels stuck out from the sides like broken wings. The ship carried valuable metals from the mining worlds back to Earth, and this trip would take 6 months. Captain Lee Dae-ho had been flying cargo ships for 15 years. He was a quiet man with gray hair and tired eyes. He knew that long trips like this were hard on crews, so he always kept his team small. Only 7 people worked on the Soul Wanderer, and right now 6 of them were sleeping in the cryopods. Cryo sleep chambers were in the lower deck of the ship. Each pod looked like a metal coffin with a glass window on top. Inside, the crew members slept a deep sleep that would keep them safe during the long journey. Their bodies would not age, and they would not feel hungry or bored. When they reached Earth, the pods would wake them up automatically. Captain Lee Dae-ho lay in his pod with his hands folded on his chest. His breathing was so slow, it was almost stopped. Next to him, Engineer Park Min-soo slept in another pod. Park was a young man who could fix anything on the ship. In the other pods were Communications Officer Kim Yoon-ho, Navigator Choi Hana, Medical, Officer Dr. Nam Soo-jin, and 2 cargo specialists, Lee Jin-woo and Song Mi-kyung. The ship's computer controlled everything while the crew slept. It watched the engines, checked the air, and made sure the ship stayed on course. Red and green lights blinked on the control panels, but no one was awake to see them. The halls were dark except for the emergency lights that cast long shadows on the walls, but the ship was not completely empty of life. A small black cat walked through the quiet halls. Her name was Nabi, which meant butterfly in Korean. She was not very big, but she was smart and fast. Her fur was completely black except for a small white spot on her chest. Her green eyes glowed in the dark like tiny stars. Nabi had been living on the Soul Wanderer for 3 years. Captain Lee Dae-ho had found her as a kitten on a space station. She was thin and hungry, hiding in a cargo box. The captain felt sorry for her and brought her onto his ship. At first, the other crew members complained about having a cat in space, but Nabi proved to be very useful. Spaceships always had problems with small animals that sneaked aboard. Rats and mice would hide in the cargo areas and eat the food supplies. Sometimes insects would come from the colony worlds and cause trouble. But Nabi was an excellent hunter. She kept the ship clean of pests, and the crew learned to love her. Now Nabi walked through the sleeping ship like a queen in her castle. She knew every corner, every pipe, and every hiding place. The ship was her home, and she protected it well. Her soft paws made no sound on the metal floors as she patrolled the corridors. She stopped at each cryopod and looked at the sleeping humans inside. The glass was cold against her nose, but she could see their faces. Captain Lee Dae-ho looked peaceful in his sleep. Engineer Park Min-soo had a small smile on his face, probably dreaming of fixing machines. Nabi purred softly. These were her humans, and she would keep them safe. The cat continued her patrol, walking through the engine room where big machines hummed quietly. The engines were working perfectly, pushing the ship through space at incredible speed. Nabi had learned not to touch the hot parts, but she liked the warm air that came from the engine vents. In the cargo bay, huge containers held the precious metals that would make the crew rich when they reached Earth. The containers were locked tight, but Nabi could smell the metal inside. She did not care about money, but she knew these boxes were important to her humans. The ship's computer watched Nabi through cameras placed throughout the ship. It had been programmed to ignore the cat's movements. Engineer Park Min-soo had spent many hours making sure the security system would not sound alarms every time Nabi walked around. The computer knew Nabi belonged on the ship, far away, in a different part of space. Other eyes were watching the Soul Wanderer. Commander Thexval stood on the bridge of his warship, looking at a screen that showed the cargo ship's location. He was a Vorthak, a race of reptile-like aliens who made their living by attacking and robbing other ships. Thexval was tall and covered with green scales. His yellow eyes were cold and cruel. "The human ship is perfect," he said to his second-in-command, Captain Zethrak. "It moves slowly, and our sensors show only 7 life forms aboard. They are probably all sleeping." Captain Zethrak nodded. He was smaller than the commander, but just as mean. "Humans always sleep during long trips. They are weak creatures who cannot stay awake like we can." The Vorthak had been watching human shipping routes for months. They knew when the cargo ships traveled and what they carried. The Soul Wanderer was carrying rare metals worth millions of credits. It would make them rich. "How many warriors do we send?" asked Captain Zethrak. "8 should be enough," Commander Thexval replied. 7 sleeping humans cannot fight back. We will take the ship easily." The Vorthak were wrong about many things. They thought humans were weak because they needed to sleep. They thought technology made humans soft and helpless. Most importantly, they had no idea that their sensors could only detect large life forms. They could see the 7 humans in their cryopods, but they could not see one small black cat walking through the halls. Nabi finished her patrol and jumped onto her favorite sleeping spot, a warm cushion near the main computer. She curled up, in a ball with her tail wrapped around her body. But even as she closed her eyes, her ears stayed alert. She could hear every sound on the ship, the hum of the engines, the whisper of air through the vents, and the quiet beeping of the computers. The ship continued through space, carrying its sleeping crew toward Earth. In a few hours, the Vorthak attack ship would catch up with them. But for now, everything was peaceful. The only guard on the Soul Wanderer was a small black cat, and she was ready for anything. Nabi opened one green eye and looked around the bridge. Something felt different, but she could not tell what it was yet. Her instincts told her to be careful. In space, danger could come from anywhere, and it was her job to protect her sleeping family. She closed her eye again and waited. Soon, she would have work to do. The Vorthak attack ship came close to the Soul Wanderer like a metal shark swimming through dark water. Captain Zethrak stood in the boarding bay with 7 other warriors. They all wore black armor that covered their green scales. Their weapons glowed with blue energy. "Remember the plan," Captain Zethrak said to his team. "We cut through the hull, Secure the sleeping humans and take control of the ship. This should be easy work. The warriors nodded. They had done this many times before. Human cargo ships were always easy targets. Humans were soft and weak, and they always slept during long trips. The Vorthak had never lost a battle against humans. Sergeant Vexitar checked his plasma cutter. He was the biggest warrior on the team, with scars on his face from old fights. "Where do we enter the ship?" he asked. "The cargo bay," Captain Zethrak replied. "Our sensors show it is empty. We cut through the hull there, then spread through the ship. Half of us go to the bridge, half secure the cargo." The warriors put on their helmets and prepared their tools. The plasma cutters would burn through the ship's metal hull like it was paper. Once inside, they would have complete control. Inside the Soul Wanderer, Nabi woke up from her nap. Something had disturbed her sleep. Her ears moved back and forth, listening carefully. She could hear a new sound, a low humming noise that did not belong to her ship. The cat jumped down from her cushion and walked to a window. Outside, she could see lights moving in the darkness. Another ship was very close to the Soul Wanderer. Nabi's green eyes watched the strange ship with interest. In 3 years of space travel, she had never seen another ship come this close. Her nose twitched. Even through the walls of the ship, she could smell something different. It was not the familiar smell of her sleeping humans or the clean metal of her ship. This smell was sharp and dangerous, like the smell of a snake. Nabi did not know what a Vorthak was, but her instincts told her these visitors were not friends. The plasma cutters began their work on the hull of the cargo bay. Bright blue flames ate through the metal like hungry mouths. The Vorthak worked quickly and quietly. They did not want to wake the sleeping humans too early. Sparks flew as the cutters finished their job. A large circle of metal fell to the floor, with a loud crash. Captain Zethrak was the first through the hole, followed by his warriors. They moved into the cargo bay with their weapons ready. The cargo bay was huge and filled with metal containers. Emergency lights cast strange shadows between the boxes. The warriors spread out, checking every corner for danger, but the bay seemed empty. "Too easy," whispered Private Kexmol. He was the youngest warrior on the team, and this was only his second raid. "Quiet," Captain Zethrak ordered. "Humans are always easy. That is why we hunt them." But Captain Zethrak was wrong. High above them, in the air vents near the ceiling, 2 green eyes watched every move they made. Nabi had heard the crash when the metal fell. She knew exactly where the sound came from. The cargo bay was part of her territory, and someone had broken into her ship. The cat moved through the air vents like a black shadow. The vents were small, but Nabi was smaller. She could go anywhere in the ship without being seen. She looked down at the intruders through the metal grates of the air vents. They were bigger than humans, with green skin and long tails. They moved like lizards, and they carried weapons that glowed with blue light. Nabi counted 8 of them. The cat's fur stood up on her back. These creatures smelled like danger, and they did not belong on her ship. Her humans were sleeping and could not protect themselves. It was up to Nabi to keep them safe. The Vorthak split into two groups, just as Captain Zethrak had planned. He would lead 4 warriors to the bridge to take control of the ship. Corporal Rexton would take 3 warriors to secure the rest of the cargo bay and find the cryo-sleep chambers. "Remember," Captain Zethrak said quietly, "we want the humans alive. Dead humans cannot tell us where they hide their treasure." The two groups moved in different directions. Captain Zethrak's group headed toward the main corridor that led to the bridge. Corporal Rexton's group began searching the cargo containers. Nabi watched from above as the intruders spread through her ship. She had to think fast. 8 enemies were too many to fight at once, but maybe she could fight them one at a time. The cat knew her ship better than anyone. Every pipe, every vent, every hiding place was familiar to her. She followed Captain Zethrak's group through the air vents. The warriors moved slowly through the corridors, looking for traps or alarms. They did not know that engineer Park Min-soo had designed the security system to ignore small animals. Nabi could move anywhere without setting off alarms. The warriors reached the main corridor. It was long and straight, with doors leading to different parts of the ship. Emergency lights made everything look red and scary. "The bridge is that way," Captain Zethrak pointed down the corridor. "Stay alert. Humans sometimes have defense systems." But as they walked, Nabi was already moving ahead of them. She knew a faster way to the bridge through the maintenance tunnels. She also knew something the Vorthak did not know. The ship had many automatic systems that could be very dangerous if someone knew how to use them. The cat reached a control panel in the wall. Engineer Park had taught her which buttons were safe to step on. Some of them controlled the lights, some controlled the doors, and some controlled other things. Nabi had learned by watching the humans work. She stepped on a button with her paw. Far behind her, a door slammed shut between 2 of the warriors in Captain Zethrak's group. What was that? Sergeant Vextar spun around with his weapon ready. "Just a door malfunction," Captain Zethrak said, but his voice sounded worried. "These old human ships always have problems," but it was not a malfunction. In the air vents above them, Nabi was already planning her next move. The intruders thought they were hunting sleeping humans, but they were wrong. They were being hunted by something much more dangerous, a small black cat who would do anything to protect her family. The real battle was about to begin. Nabi moved through the air vents like a black ghost. The metal passages were narrow, but she knew every turn and corner. Below her, the Vorthak warriors walked through her ship with their glowing weapons. They thought they were the hunters, but they were wrong. Captain Zethrak led his group toward the bridge. The corridor was quiet except for the sound of their heavy boots on the metal floor. The emergency lights made their green scales look almost black. "This is too easy," Sergeant Vexatar said quietly. "Where are the defense systems? Where are the guards?" "Humans are weak," Captain Zethrak replied. "They sleep through everything. By the time they wake up, we will control their ship." Behind them, Private Thalwick jumped when another door suddenly closed. "Captain, the doors keep moving by themselves." "Old ships have old computers," Captain Zethrak said, but his yellow eyes looked worried. "Keep moving." In the cargo bay, Corporal Rexton and his 3 warriors searched through the metal containers. The boxes were locked tight, but they could see labels that showed valuable metals inside. "We are going to be rich," said Private Gorvin. He was a thin Vorthak with long claws. "These metals are worth more than our ship." "First we secure the humans," Corporal Rexton said. "Then we worry about treasure." But Corporal Rexton did not know that above him, green eyes were watching every move he made. Nabi had decided to start with the smaller group. 4 warriors were easier to handle than 8. The cat moved to a different part of the air vents. She knew the ship's kitchen was nearby, and kitchens had many useful things: sharp knives, hot stoves, and lots of places to hide. Engineer Park had always warned the crew to be careful in the kitchen because the equipment could be dangerous. Private Gorvin walked away from his group to check a noise near the kitchen. He was curious about human food and wanted to see what they ate during space travel. His clawed feet made clicking sounds on the metal floor. The kitchen was dark except for a few blinking lights on the cooking machines. Gorvin turned on his helmet light and looked around. He saw cabinets full of food packages, a big refrigerator, and cooking equipment he did not understand. "Humans eat strange things," he said to himself, opening a cabinet. Above him, Nabi crept through an air vent that opened right over the kitchen. She could see the warrior below looking through the human food. His back was turned to her, and his weapon was hanging from his belt. This was her chance. Nabi had hunted many things in her 3 years on the ship: rats, mice, sometimes flying insects that got aboard at space stations. She knew how to be patient, how to wait for the perfect moment, and how to strike fast and hard. The cat pushed open the air vent cover with her paw. It fell to the floor with a small clang. Gorvin spun around, but he was too slow. Nabi dropped from the ceiling like a black lightning bolt. Her claws were out, and her teeth were ready. She landed right on Gorvin's head and held on tight. The warrior screamed in surprise and pain as sharp claws dug into his scaly skin. "Get off! Get off!" Gorvin yelled, spinning around and hitting at the cat with his hands. But Nabi was too fast and too small. She moved like water, always staying out of reach of his big claws. The Vorthak warrior pulled out his weapon and tried to shoot the cat, but Nabi jumped away at the last second. The blue energy beam hit the kitchen wall and made a big hole. Sparks flew everywhere, and alarms began to ring. Gorvin's face was covered with scratches. Green blood dripped from cuts around his eyes and neck. He had never fought anything so fast and fierce. "What kind of creature is this?" he gasped. But Nabi was not finished. She knocked over a pot of cooking oil, making the floor slippery. When Gorvin tried to follow her, his feet slipped, and he fell hard on his back. His weapon flew across the room. The cat jumped onto his chest and looked into his yellow eyes. For a moment, they stared at each other. Gorvin saw intelligence in those green eyes, and something else: a fierce love for her territory and her sleeping humans. Then Nabi bit his nose and jumped away before he could grab her. Gorvin rolled over, holding his nose and moaning. Blood ran between his fingers. "Help!" he called to his teammates. "There is something on this ship, something dangerous!" But when Corporal Rexton and the others came running, they found Gorvin on the floor with his face covered in scratches. His weapon was broken, and the kitchen was a mess. "What happened?" Corporal Rexton demanded. "A shadow creature," Gorvin said, his voice shaking. It came from the ceiling like a demon. It had claws and teeth and glowing eyes. The other warriors looked around the kitchen. They saw the hole in the wall, the spilled oil, and the broken weapon. But they did not see any creature. "Where is it now?" asked Private Kexmole. "Gone," Gorvin whispered. "It disappeared like smoke." Corporal Rexton helped Gorvin to his feet. The warrior's face looked terrible, with deep scratches that would leave scars. "You said it was small?" "Yes, but so fast. And its eyes, they glowed like stars in the dark." On the other side of the ship, Captain Zethrak heard the alarms. He stopped his team in the corridor and spoke into his radio. "Rexton, report. What is happening?" "We found some kind of defense system, Corporal," Rexton replied. "Gorvin is hurt, but he will live. Be careful, Captain. This ship has surprises." Captain Zethrak looked at his warriors. They all seemed nervous now. Sergeant Vextar kept looking at the shadows on the walls. Private Thalwick jumped every time a pipe made a noise. "It was probably a robot," Captain Zethrak said. "Humans use small robots for defense. We can handle robots." But deep down, he was starting to worry. The mission was supposed to be easy. 7 sleeping humans could not fight back. So why did everything feel wrong? Above them in the air vents, Nabi cleaned, her claws with her tongue. The first enemy was hurt, but not dead. That was good. She did not want to kill if she did not have to, but she would do whatever was needed to protect her humans. The cat looked through a vent grate at the remaining 7 warriors. They were scared, now looking over their shoulders and jumping at small sounds. Good. Fear would make them make mistakes. Nabi smiled the way only cats can smile. The hunt was just beginning, and she was very good at hunting. The alarm stopped ringing, but the fear in the Vorthak warriors did not go away. They moved through the ship more carefully now, looking at every shadow and listening to every sound. Private Gorvin walked behind the others, his face wrapped in bandages from the medical kit. The scratches burned, and he kept looking up at the ceiling. "Stay together," Corporal Rexton ordered his team. Whatever attacked Gorvin might still be nearby. But staying together was exactly what Nabi wanted. When enemies stayed in groups, they were easier to find. The cat moved through the air vents above them, following their every step. She could hear their worried voices and smell their fear. Captain Zethrak's group had almost reached the bridge when the lights went out. The corridor became completely dark except for the small lights on their helmets. "What now?" Sergeant Vextar growled, raising his weapon. "Emergency power," Captain Zethrak said, but his voice was not confident anymore. "The ship's computer is trying to stop us." The lights came back on, then went off again. Then they started flashing on and off very fast, like a disco. The warriors spun around, trying to watch all directions at once. In the flashing lights, every shadow looked like an enemy. High above them, Nabi sat next to a control panel. She had learned which buttons controlled the lights by watching Engineer Park work. The flashing lights confused the invaders and hurt their eyes, but cats could see well in the dark, so the lights did not bother Nabi at all. Private Thalwick was getting very nervous. "Captain, I think we should go back to our ship. This place feels cursed." "We are Vorthak warriors," Captain Zethrak snapped. "We do not run from human tricks." But even as he said it, Captain Zethrak was starting to wonder if this was really a good idea. Nothing was going the way it should. The ship seemed to be fighting back all by itself. In the cargo bay, Corporal Rexton decided to split his team up again. "Kexmol, go check the cryo-sleep chambers. Find those sleeping humans. Gorvin, you stay here and watch the entrance. I will search the other rooms." This was exactly what Nabi had hoped for. Separated enemies were much easier to handle. She followed Private Kexmol as he walked toward the cryo chambers where her humans were sleeping. The cryo bay was a quiet room filled with 7 glass pods. Inside each pod, a human lay sleeping peacefully. Captain Lee Dae-ho looked calm in his pod, his chest rising and falling very slowly. Engineer Park Min-soo had a small smile on his face. Private Kexmol walked between the pods, looking at the sleeping humans. "So weak," he said quietly. "They cannot even stay awake for their own defense." Above him, Nabi's green eyes glowed with anger. These were her humans, her family. She would not let anyone hurt them. The cat had noticed something earlier that gave her an idea. Engineer Park's cryopod had a small problem with its control panel. Sometimes it would start the wake-up process by mistake, then stop again. Park had been meaning to fix it, but he kept forgetting. Nabi dropped down from the air vent and landed silently on top of Park's pod. She walked across the control panel, stepping on buttons with her paws. She had watched the humans use these controls many times. The pod began to hum louder. Inside, Park's breathing started to get faster. The wake-up process would take about an hour, but at least it had started. If Nabi could protect the ship long enough, Park would wake up and help her. Private Kexmol heard the humming sound and turned around. He saw a small black shape on top of one of the pods, but in the dim light he could not tell what it was. "Hey!" he called out. "What are you?" Nabi looked at him with her bright green eyes. For a moment they stared at each other across the room. Then the cat did something that made Private Kexmol's blood turn cold. She smiled, showing her small white teeth. The warrior raised his weapon, but Nabi was already moving. She jumped from the pod and ran toward a maintenance shaft. Kexmol fired his weapon, but the blue energy beam missed and hit the wall instead. "Come back here," Kexmol shouted, running after the cat. But Nabi knew exactly where she was going. The maintenance shaft led to a room full of pipes and machines that controlled the ship's artificial gravity. It was a dangerous place where only trained engineers were supposed to go. Kexmol followed the cat into the maintenance room. It was hot and noisy, full of spinning machines and glowing pipes. Steam hissed from valves, and warning signs covered the walls in human writing that he could not read. "I have you trapped now," Kexmol said, pointing his weapon into the dark corners of the room. But he was wrong. Nabi was not trapped. She was exactly where she wanted to be. The cat jumped onto a control panel and began stepping on buttons. She did not know exactly what all the buttons did, but she had seen Engineer Park work on these machines. Some buttons were red, which usually meant danger. Those seemed like good ones to try. Suddenly, the artificial gravity in the room began to change. One moment Kexmol felt normal, the next moment he felt like he weighed twice as much. Then the gravity disappeared completely and he started floating toward the ceiling. "What is happening?" he screamed, trying to swim through the air. The gravity came back stronger than before, and Kexmol crashed to the floor. Then it went away again, and he bounced off the ceiling. Up and down, heavy and light, the gravity kept changing while Nabi danced across the control panel. Finally, Private Kexmol hit his head hard on a pipe and stopped moving. He floated unconscious in the middle of the room, while Nabi sat on the gravity controls, cleaning her paws. 2 down, 6 to go. The cat returned to the air vents and headed back toward the others. She could hear Corporal Rexton calling for Kexmol on the radio, but there was no answer. Soon he would come looking for his missing warrior. In Engineer Park's cryopod, the wake-up process continued. His body temperature was slowly rising, and his brain was starting to wake up from the deep sleep. But he would not be conscious for another 40 minutes. Nabi would have to keep fighting alone until then. But she was not worried. This was her ship. These were her humans, and she was very good at protecting what was hers. The Vorthak warriors were learning something that humans had known for thousands of years. Never underestimate a cat defending her territory. They were small, but they were fierce, clever, and completely without fear when protecting their family. The hunt continued, and Nabi was winning. Captain Zethrak was getting very angry. 2 of his warriors had disappeared, and the ship seemed to be fighting back by itself. The lights kept flashing, doors opened and closed on their own, and strange sounds came from the walls. "This is not possible," he said to Sergeant Vextar. "It is just a cargo ship with sleeping humans." But Sergeant Vextar was no longer sure. He had been a warrior for 20 years, and he had never seen anything like this. "Maybe the humans have a secret weapon," he whispered. "Then we destroy it," Captain Zethrak growled. "We go to the bridge and take control of the ship's computer. Once we control the computer, we control everything." The 3 remaining warriors in his group moved toward the bridge. But they walked slowly now, looking at every corner and listening to every sound. Their weapons were ready, and their nerves were tight, like guitar strings. In the cargo bay, Corporal Rexton was alone with Private Gorvin. 2 of his warriors had vanished without a trace. His radio calls to Private Kexmol got no answer. "We should leave," Private Gorvin said, touching the bandages on his scratched face. "This ship is cursed. It has demons." "We are not leaving without the treasure," Corporal Rexton replied, but his voice shook a little. He was scared too, though. He tried not to show it. Above them both, Nabi moved through the air vents like a black shadow. She had been very busy. While the warriors worried and argued, she had been preparing her final tricks. The cat had spent 3 years learning about her ship. She knew which pipes carried hot steam, which wires controlled the doors, and which buttons made the maintenance, robots' work. Now she would use everything she had learned. Captain Zethrak and his 2 warriors reached the door to the bridge. The door was locked, but Sergeant Vextar had a tool that could open any lock. As he worked on the door, Private Tholwick watched the corridor behind them. "I do not like this," Private Tholwick said. "It is too quiet." "Good," Captain Zethrak said. "Quiet means no more surprises." But he was wrong. Nabi had saved her biggest surprise for last. The bridge door opened with a soft hiss. Captain Zethrak stepped inside first, his weapon ready. The bridge was dark except for the glow from the computer screens. Red and green lights blinked on the control panels like tiny stars. "Finally," Captain Zethrak said, "now we take control." He walked toward the main computer console, but as he reached for the controls, two green eyes appeared in the darkness. They glowed like tiny moons, watching him from across the room. "What is that?" Sergeant Vextar whispered. The eyes moved closer. In the dim light, they could see a small, black shape sitting on the captain's chair. It was smaller than a human child, with pointed ears and a long tail. But its eyes held an intelligence that made Captain Zethrak's scales crawl with fear. "A cat," he breathed. "It is just a cat." But even as he said it, Captain Zethrak knew this was not just any cat. This was the creature that had been hunting his warriors. This small, furry animal had defeated 6 trained Vorthak soldiers. Nabi sat perfectly still on the captain's chair, her green eyes never leaving the 3 warriors. She had led them exactly where she wanted them. The bridge was her favorite place on the ship, and she knew every control panel and secret passage. "Shoot it," Captain Zethrak ordered. Sergeant Vextar raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Nabi pressed a button on the arm of the chair with her paw. Suddenly, all the doors to the bridge slammed shut. The 3 warriors were trapped inside with her. "The doors!" Private Tholwick ran to the exit and pulled at the handle. "They will not open." Captain Zethrak tried to grab Nabi, but the cat was too fast. She jumped from the chair and ran across the control panels, stepping on buttons as she went. The ship's computer began to speak in a calm female voice. Emergency lockdown activated. All blast doors sealed. Artificial gravity fluctuation in progress. The floor tilted sideways, and the 3 warriors fell against the wall. Then the gravity disappeared completely, and they floated helplessly in the air. Nabi, however, dug her claws into the fabric of the captain's chair and held on tight. "Make it stop!" Sergeant Vexatar yelled, trying to swim through the air toward the cat. But Nabi was not finished. She jumped to another control panel and pressed more buttons. The lights went out, leaving them in complete darkness. Then emergency alarms began to ring very loudly. "Warning," the computer voice said. "Hull breach detected. Emergency repair. Drones activated." Small maintenance robots rolled out of hidden panels in the walls. They were designed to fix small problems on the ship, but they thought the Vorthak warriors were the problem. The robots began spraying the floating aliens with sticky foam that was meant to seal air leaks. "Get this stuff off me," Private Tholwick screamed as the foam covered his armor. Captain Zethrak managed to grab onto a control panel and pull himself down. He could see Nabi sitting calmly in the darkness, her eyes glowing like green stars. She was watching him with what looked almost like amusement. "What are you?" he whispered. Nabi tilted her head and made a soft, purring sound. To her, this was just a game. A very serious game where she protected her sleeping family, but still a game. Meanwhile, in the cryo bay, engineer Park Min-soo was finally waking up. His eyes opened slowly and he took a deep breath. The wake-up process was almost complete. Park sat up in his pod and looked around the room. Everything seemed normal, but he could hear alarms ringing in the distance. Something was wrong with his ship. He climbed out of the pod and put on his work clothes. His head felt foggy from the long sleep, but his engineer training took over. When alarms rang, it meant the ship needed help. Park walked to a wall panel and checked the ship's status. What he saw made his eyes wide with surprise. The security system showed 8 unknown life forms aboard the ship, but it also showed that 6 of them were unconscious or trapped. "Nabi," he said quietly, understanding what had happened. "Good girl." The engineer hurried toward the bridge, following the sound of the alarms. He found 3 aliens floating helplessly in the air, covered with repair foam and completely confused. Nabi sat on the captain's chair like a small black queen, watching her prisoners with satisfaction. "Hello, Captain," Park said to Captain Zethrak. "I think you picked the wrong ship to attack." Captain Zethrak looked at the human with desperate eyes. "Please," he begged, "call off your demon cat. We surrender." Park smiled and walked over to pet Nabi. The cat purred loudly and rubbed against his hand. "She is not a demon," he said. "She is just a very good ship's cat." Later, after Park had woken up the rest of the crew and they had secured all 8 Vorthak prisoners, Captain Lee Dae-ho made a special entry in the ship's log. Chief Security Officer Nabi has successfully defended the Soul Wanderer against hostile boarding action. Recommend immediate promotion and extra fish treats. Also recommend all future human vessels include feline crew members for defensive purposes. Nabi sat on her favorite cushion, cleaning her paws and looking very pleased with herself. She had protected her humans and her ship. It had been a good day's work. The Vorthak prisoners were sent back to their people with a message. Human ships were protected by creatures far more dangerous than any weapon. Small, furry creatures with green eyes and absolutely no fear. From that day on, alien pirates gave human cargo ships a very wide space. They had learned to fear the legend of the ship's cat